I first of all want to thank the Chief Rabbi for this wonderful invitation. I would be overwhelmed by the number of people who turned up, but I was told that most people thought this is where the line for the free ice cream is. Boy, was I disappointed. Also, this is going to be a very personal kind of presentation, a little bit less about world headlines. And I've done a lot of reflection about these issues in recent weeks. And again, I want to thank the Chief Rabbi for encouraging me to do so. But the most important reason, the compelling reason to want to come back to South Africa is that I was one of the spokesmen for the Jewish groups in August 2001 at the United Nations World Conference Against Racism, which turned out, as everyone here knows, to be the worst sustained public manifestation of hatred against the Jewish people since the end of World War II. And probably later on with our schmooze with General Amirdor, probably speak a little bit more about it. Finally, I took a look at the artist's rendering, which is very impressive, and found out the color of my new glasses, which I'll be ordering tomorrow. I'm speaking about three people and three themes. First, Zachor al Tishkach. Secondly, Kol Hamatzil Nefesh Echad MiYisrael. Third, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. For those who are not familiar, Zachor al Tishkach, remember, do not forget. Anyone who saves a Jewish life, and the Torah is above all else. I've been given, I think, about 40 minutes. Our trusty aides here will be trying to actually stop an ordained Orthodox rabbi from extending his time period. Hatzlacha Rabbah. But actually, the most difficult choice is the first choice, speaking about Simon Wiesenthal. A man whom I had the honor to know and work with for nearly 30 years. So, on the other hand, I know that there are young people right here in South Africa, as well as LA and in Israel, who don't know who Simon Wiesenthal is. So real quickly, before he became the famous Nazi hunter, Simon Wiesenthal was a victim of the Nazis. He and his wife, Sila, lost 89 members of their family during the Shoah. She was hidden by righteous Gentiles. Simon was not so lucky. In May of 1945, when the US military, quote unquote, liberated Mauthausen, he was too weak to stand. He actually had to crawl out to the American troops because he had already secretly began to write down information about the murderers of our people. In fact, when you visit the Museum of Tolerance in LA, you'll see a remarkable letter from May 24th, 1945, 2 weeks after he was liberated, in which he gave in to the US military government his first list of Nazi war criminals. Simon Wiesenthal was asked by us in 1977 to give us his good name, and the price for that good name was, he said, I know you're going to help me about the old Nazis, but I also want to be with people who are concerned about the haters today and the people who threaten our future. And that is how I became involved with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and why a brief 37 years later, I'm still with Rabbi Heyer at Simon Wiesenthal Center. And I would just encourage those of you who want to be involved in some of the important issues of the day, just go to our website at wiesenthal.com and give us your email address, and we'll depress you 4 out of 5 times, I promise. So I picked maybe 2 or 3 stories about Simon. The first one took place about 10 weeks after the end of World War II. And Mr. Wiesenthal was already in a DP camp, and he was a kind of minor official there among the other inmates. But word already spread even then that he was working with the US military in rounding up Nazi war criminals. And so he received one day a delegation of 10 Jews. Unlike Simon, these have been people who escaped to the forest and during the time of the Shoah fought the Germans, killed Nazis, and they came to Simon with a very simple request. Here's a list, 10 people, get us the addresses, we'll take care of the rest. Simple request. Mr. Wiesenthal looked at the group and said, I'm not giving you the addresses. I'm not going to cooperate with you. So what are you talking about? These people can go free. You're in a position to help. He said, look, let me ask you something. How many of these Nazis do you think you'll be able to kill? 6, 60, 600, 6,000? Sooner or later, we now have the Americans, the British, the French, the Russians. They're not going to allow us Jews to go around killing these Germans. Eventually, you're going to be caught. You'll be put in jail. And that's simply not where I want to identify with. I will not cooperate with you because what will happen is we'll have the following headlines. From 1939 to 1945, the Germans murdered 6 million Jews. And from 1945 to 46 or 7, the Jews managed to kill 6, 60, 600, 6,000 Germans. What has happened now and transpired in the Shoah demands a different kind of response. End of meeting. Unbelievable. So in 1984, Simon Wiesenthal, who told me the story personally, so it's an important insight into the man. He would go to Israel twice a year to see his daughter and to see other survivors, stop at Yad Vashem, and always to go to Kibbutz Lochamei Getaot, north of Haifa. That group of 10 all lived in the kibbutz. They had a reunion. Most of the 10 people came over to Simon and said, history proved you right. You were able to bring 1,100 criminals before the bar of justice. We made our lives in Eretz Yisrael. We have children and grandchildren. We don't know where you got this understanding right at the end of the Shoah, but you were right. The former chairman, however, refused to shake Simon's hand. He said, Simon, 4 of the people on that list were never brought to justice, and I hold you responsible. And that is the story that Simon Wiesenthal told. One other story about what made this man tick, because he spent half of his life in pursuit of trying to resurrect a sense of justice. This is a story that comes out of our documentary on Mr. Wiesenthal from Mariah Films. And when you see this clip, it's amazing because the gentleman who speaks, even by the time he was interviewed, must have been in his 40s or 50s. Perfect Aryan, blonde, tall, blue eyes. A Jewish kid who lost his entire family in the Shoah. In 1947, when people didn't really know who Adolf Eichmann was yet, Simon did, and he found out that the family was trying to get Adolf Eichmann declared dead. This way, the Allies would stop looking for him. And Mr. Wiesenthal was involved in the effort to counter that. He insinuated this young Aryan boy into a friendship with the Eichmann family, with the wife and the kids. One day he came back and said, Simon, I was invited to take one of the sons, the young sons of Eichmann today, out on the lake, and we had a great time, and tomorrow I'm going back and I'm going to kill that kid. And Mr. Wiesenthal said, you're not going to do anything of that sort. That child is innocent. And what we have to do is, what we need are convicted criminals. And he used to say, and he was a great Rabbi in his way, he used to say, you know, for 2,000 years, the world, the Christian world, held the Jews collectively responsible for the death of one Jew. He said, in our pursuit of justice, we shouldn't be guilty of the same approach. Let's go after the perpetrators. Let's not prejudge their children or their grandchildren. One side note, I saw it myself many times. Throughout his life, when Mr. Wiesenthal would be in a German airport, young Germans would come over with kvitlach. What was not a prayer? You know what was on these little pieces of white paper? Their father or uncle or grandfather's name, date of birth. Please, my father won't tell me what he did in the war. Can you please find out for me what the legacy of my parents has been? Now, one last story about Simon, because we can spend the whole time just on his wonderful and powerful legacy. You can accuse Simon Wiesenthal of many things, but no one ever accused him of being an Orthodox Jew. He had his relationship with the Eibishter, a lot of anger there, understandable. He loved telling the rabbis dirty Yiddish jokes, which cannot even be repeated in unmixed company. But he did tell me he kept a siddur on his nightstand. I want to tell you the story behind that siddur. In the winter of '46, it was a horrible, very difficult winter, the commanding officer in the camp called him in and said, Wiesenthal, we've just heard that about 2-hour drive from here is a medieval castle, and supposedly it's filled with Judaica, with items of the Jewish victims. I requisitioned a truck, which is not easy. I'm sending you with a driver and a member of the American military clergy, a Jewish fellow. They drove through the snow. They came to this magnificent medieval castle. They flung open the doors, and there it was, the only remnants of thousands of Jewish households, the Leichter, the Kiddush cups, the Gemaras. It filled every room. People there just stood stunned, and after a while, Mr. Wiesenthal said, look, this is going to take more than one visit, but we have to start somewhere. And they divided up the castle. The clergy went one flight up, Mr. Wiesenthal went flight down, and as he took out his pad to start writing the basic information, he heard a scream and a thud. He rushed upstairs. The military chaplain had fainted. He was clutching a siddur in his hand. When he came to, he couldn't speak. He gave Wiesenthal the siddur. He opened up the siddur, and in a hurried pencil were the following words inscribed. Whoever gets the siddur, please get it to my brother. The murderers are among us. I hear them in the next building. Remember us, revenge our memory. It was signed by the sister of that chaplain. And that was Simon Wiesenthal's siddur on his nightstand, because later on, when this gentleman passed, the family felt that that siddur belonged with Simon Wiesenthal. For me, in addition to the Shoah, Soviet Jewry was the driving force in my life. I was born in 1950. A lot of kids in my generation were angry at their parents. How come you didn't do more to stop what happened in the Shoah? Maybe an unfair accusation, but it was there. And for young people here, it's difficult to grasp that there was a Cold War, and that 3 million Jews after the Shoah were trapped inside a cultural genocide. They had no future as Jews, and they had no equality in the Soviet Union. They were trapped. And our goal, I was, I think, 15 years old when I started licking stamps for a 17-year-old named Glenn Richter for MTA in New York, and he started together with the late Yaakov Birnbaum, the student struggle for Soviet Jewry. All the adults in the room said, "What are you doing? Shah still? How do you know it's not going to be worse?" If you will, this little revolt was put together by younger Jews who simply said, whatever we did in Jewish history till now didn't work. Fast forward to December 1971, and a terrible thing took place in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. There was a trial involving a group of Soviet Jews who were kind of faked into doing an attempted hijack. 3 people were condemned to death. There were demonstrations all over Europe and in Israel. In the States, nothing. None of the groups seemed to get motivated, and Jewish lives were at stake. Until we heard at Yeshiva University on Thursday night that on Sunday morning there was going to be a demonstration near the Washington Monument, and that free buses were going to be made available. 1,200, mostly YU and Stern College students, drove down. Who was the guest speaker? Mayor Kahane. I have to say, so when it came to Soviet Jewry, his place in history is certainly secure. Very controversial figure. I was not a member of the JDL. In fact, neither were the other 12 to 1,500 participants. We then marched to, if you know Washington, to K and 17th Street, near the Capitol Hilton, and a few doors down was the Soviet mission. All of a sudden, Mayor Kahane sits down in the middle of the street. And behind him, other people sit down. And finally, we're all sitting down in the middle of the street. This is during the Vietnam era, when on weekends, people could volunteer to the police force in DC and do some clopping. And I wasn't particularly interested in getting arrested, but I saw that they took him away in 3 minutes, but most of the kids didn't move. Make a long story short, 900 of us were arrested. In fact, so many students were arrested in this nonviolent, peaceful, I was so desperate, I was saying Tillim. And I still got arrested. So they drove us around town, eventually shoved us into these small cells, and just like a bad movie, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you see the sun going down, and you ask the officer, "Don't I get a phone call?" And they say, "Yes, but that's only after you're arrested, and we can't process you guys yet because there are too many people." So 2 things about that day. Number one, I decided I didn't like being in jail, and I haven't been arrested since. Number 2, I was quite disappointed that the Jewish establishment didn't do anything, that it came to coming to Washington with Mayor Kahane, and look what happened. At 11 p.m., we were finally bailed out. And so do I have a record? The answer is no, because by the time they got to our group, all the fingerprint paper in Washington, D.C. was gone. All of the film for the cameras, once upon a time we used film in cameras, was gone. So they said, "Well, we can't process you, you can go home." And the nard that I was, I said, "Well, wait a second, doesn't someone have to post bail?" And he said, "Don't worry, someone posted bail for the entire group." Oh, the only thing I remember about that night is I called my mother. May she live and be well. I explained to her I'd been arrested, and I was on the way back to New York. And like any Jewish mother, she said, be careful and don't do it again. So never knew. And who bailed us out? So at the Wiesenthal Center, every year since we've come into existence, at our national events, we give medals of valor to great people. If you've never heard this name before, Google it. If you can find the book, Operation Action, be very difficult, but it's worth looking for. The man's name is Willie Pearl. Willie Pearl, by the time I met him, had serious Parkinson's, shaking horribly. Willie Pearl is one of the greatest heroes of Jewish history. His life, or as a Jewish figure, leadership, started in 1938 when he was a 27-year-old lawyer in Vienna, and with the other young Jews of his era were crowded into a room. He was selected by this skinny Nazi official who put a gun to the back of his head and said, I'm going to count to 3 and blow your brains out. Well, he counted to 2, and he suddenly blurted out and said, well, you can kill me, but I have a great way to get rid of the Jews of Austria. So Adolf Eichmann put the gun down. And believe it or not, Willie Pearl and a few others convinced the Germans, before there was a quote-unquote final solution, to free up the assets of the Jews so that they could buy ships and then try to take Jewish refugees from Austria, Germany, some of them came out of Dachau, and take them to Eretz Yisrael. The earlier version of his book was called The Four-Front War. Why? He had to fight the Germans. He had to fight the British. He had to fight the Jewish organizations, Nebuch, who just didn't understand what was unfolding. And he had to fight Jews who couldn't grasp the threat that was in front of their eyes. And after they did, it was too late. It's an amazing, amazing story where he eventually comes to the United States in '44 to escape the Brits, not even the Germans. Joins the US military and was the prosecuting attorney, if you ever heard of the massacre in Malmedy of American soldiers during Christmas time of December 1944, he was the prosecutor for the US military against the Nazis. And in 1961, he gave testimony against Eichmann. Unbelievable. And to actually have met this man was just amazing zchut. But it was only debriefing him before the dinner that I found out, coincidentally, he's the guy who not only bailed us out in 1971, but he was a professor of law in Washington, attached to no Jewish organization, I think maybe except for the JDL. And he was the one who came up with the whole idea of a nonviolent demonstration in Washington that would capture the headlines. And he's the man who paid from his pocket the bail for 900 YU and Stern students. Willie Pearl, one of not only my heroes, he should be, and Menachem Begin wrote about him and others, one of the singular greatest heroes, not only through his mind, but through his action and his personal bravery to save Jewish people. So, as you've heard, Soviet Jewry became a very important, maybe central part of my life. So in 1972, my friend Tavi Koenigsberg, who's now a clinical psychologist in Jerusalem, and I went to the Soviet Union for Shabbat Shuvah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. In total, 4 weeks at a time when the Jewish people there were suffering terribly. Now, as a naive 22-year-old, I thought I was going there to help them. Of course, it turned out that I was exposed to a cadre of people, some of whom were house painters, some were famous physicists and mathematicians, of Jews who simply were Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. They simply said, and many of these people could not tell the difference between an Aleph and a Bet. And yet they announced, I'm a Jew, I want to go to Israel. When you did that in the Soviet Union, your life was over. No more job, no more yichus. Your wife and kids might have problems even if they don't go along with you. Incredibly courageous people, starting in Moscow, Yom Kippur in Moscow. After that, every year you think back to that time. The city of Rostov, that was captured not once but twice by the Germans in World War II. In the city of Baku, Azerbaijan, where I'm going to come back and talk about one person I met there, and then on to Tashkent, Alma-Ata, and finally Leningrad. By the time we left the Soviet Union, we didn't even have our tefillin with us. We had thankfully been able to give away everything we had and been able to also take out the names and specific data about people who wanted to make Aliyah, because without that data, it was impossible to get out. So who is Reb Tzvi? Moscow, I can't tell you how depressing it was to come as an American Jew to Moscow because, first of all, the people dressed shabbily. It felt like 1938. And you had soldiers and KGB making life miserable for people who showed up that Yom Kippur. We were completely demoralized. When we got to Baku, which is on the Caspian Sea, we came to the shul, and this was a unique synagogue because it housed two minyanim. One, you might say, was Sephardi, although it included Jews whose ancestors left after the destruction of the first temple. And then European Jews who fled from Hitler or were captured by the Soviets when they divided up Poland. And when the local Jewish population heard there were two young American Jews, the whole town showed up. The local Frank Sinatra, the football star. And these people, many of them were Georgian Jews, were generally fearless. They didn't give a hoot what anybody said. It was really amazing. And then everyone kept talking about, wait, Reb Tzvi, you'll meet Reb Tzvi. Well, we were brought out to his sukkah. Kosher sukkah to make a bracha was unbelievable. And there was a short man with a gaunt, with a white beard, big sort of classic yarmulke like the cantors have, blind, dwarfed by these two mammoth KGB people. Not one, but two. So we're introduced to Reb Tzvi. Who is Reb Tzvi? Well, it turns out he was 91 years old, an incredible Talmid Chacham, knew all of the Talmud and everything associated with it by heart. We were to find out that he had a magnificent Judaica library, and the problem for him was his chevruta. His learning partner had passed 2 years before. On top of that, his only daughter was a top official of the Communist Party. So we walked to Reb Tzvi. The man has no flexibility, and he's blind. They introduce us to him. We talk to him in Ivrit, and they fill his glass all the way with vodka. He's going to make the kiddush for the hundreds of people there. I'll never forget this. He turns to the KGB guy and says in Russian, look, one of the two guys here, he doesn't even speak Yiddish, meaning me. So would you mind very much if I make a special l'chaim in your honor, the two of you, but I'm going to do it in Hebrew? Well, this was a huge, big thing. The entire community is there, And Reb Tzvi is going to say something great about these two schlubs who don't know any Ivrit. He holds up the glass and he says like this in Hebrew, Aleihem ne'emar, shaketz tishaktzenu, v'ta'ev tita'avenu, al tidrosh l'shlomam u'letovotam kol yemei chayecha. Yemei chayecha olam hazeh, kol yemei chayecha olam haba. So, in English, we'll keep it short and sweet. The two guys who are surrounding me are the scum of the earth. Do not trust them under any circumstances. If you ever bump into them, run the other way, and that includes if for some reason you actually meet them after you've died. Wow. So we eventually made our way to Reb Tzvi's apartment. The main reason was that he understood who we were, and we were going back to Moscow on the way out. And he asked us to each take 2 Sfarim from his library and bring to the refuseniks in Moscow. I remember I brought a Concordancia from 1848. And we did fulfill that shlichut. And then for about 2 hours, we sat at the feet of a master, of a Rebbe. And I'm not the biggest Talmid Chacham in the world, but I did sit scared for an entire year in the shiur of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. And this man's Torah was gold. It was so advanced, he could have been a Rosh Yeshiva anywhere, could have been a professor of Talmud anywhere. He was trapped, blind, no chavrusa. You know, when you walk away and you have to say, God, where's the Yosher? How could you do this to this man? And his only daughter is a Communist Party official. Before we left town, we found out that Reb Tzvi wasn't totally honest with us. He was teaching. We found out he was teaching college students the Aleph Bet. Think about a guy in the level of a Rav Soloveitchik, or of Moshe Feinstein, or an Einstein, teaching the ABCs. Now, 3.5 years ago, I was invited to visit a new country called Azerbaijan. Didn't take too long to twist my arm. I was going to an interfaith conference, very interesting, different lecture, different story. But I wanted to go back to the shul. I wanted to say a prayer for Reb Tzvi, which I did. But I want to tell you one other piece of news, because it informs us also about leadership. All 3 of these people do in their way. No one I met in the Jewish community had any recollection of Reb Tzvi. And when I think about it, it made sense, because the lives that he touched, the young people, they made it to Israel. But when you talk about someone as accomplished as him, someone who survived Hitler and Stalin and all the rest, this Gaon of Torah, I believe that he did have, in the end, great satisfaction in simply teaching the letters of the Aleph Bet to Jewish college students. But at the end of the day, there's no monument to the Reb Tzvis of the world. You know what their monument is? The Jewish people who live today in the land of Israel. This is really quite an auspicious opportunity for me to hear from the community. And if it's okay, I'm happy to take your questions or comments. So if you are going to make a comment and have a question, please keep your comments to 1 minute before you go to the question. Anyone? Yes, ma'am. Hold on.
The children, offspring of many of these Nazi officials during the Holocaust, are they today part of the neo-Nazi movement that has come, revived and come back? Okay,
Germany. It's a very interesting and complex situation. A few facts. Number one, thankfully, the Chancellor, Merkel, is a friend of Israel and a friend of the Jewish people. What happens after her? We're now 3 generations plus down the road. Who knows? But in terms of the intelligence and military cooperation between Israel and Germany, it's quite profound and it's very important to Israel. On the other hand, the collective memory, even in a place like Germany that made an effort, is certainly eroding. And in part, that is reflected in the fact that in the European parliamentary elections just now, a member of the German neo-Nazi party got enough votes to go to Brussels. Now it's just one, and we got big Tsaris with Greece, and with Italy, and with Ukraine, and with France, et cetera, but we are looking now at almost 4 generations of Germans, including a significant Turkish population, for whom they don't know very much. They may, even though it's still taught in the schools, there are films that are made, but you also have intellectuals who say we suffered too, looking for moral relativism, and of course, a lot of people, especially from the left, who have been demonizing Israel as latter-day Nazis now for 10 or 15 years, and who believe that they themselves are bulletproof from being accused of being anti-Semitic, because only the right-wingers can be accused of being anti-Semitic. So I think the short answer to the question is not necessarily. It's not necessarily a DNA link between what's going on. When the unification of Germany came, a lot of the neo-Nazis came from Eastern Germany for many, many reasons. But overall, Germany is a democracy. It's an important partner to Israel in many areas. And we're going to have to work very hard collectively to maintain a positive relationship with that country, because as you know, the rest of Europe is going, as we say in Chinese, down the toilet. Yes, sir. Just 1 second, we'll get you a mic.
Thanks very much. For somebody who's totally confused, could you give us a view on who are the good and who are the bad guys in Ukraine? And if you could tag onto that, your views on Putin's attitude towards Israel and the Jews.
Okay, I'm part of your minion. For those of us, on the outside looking in, Rabbi Heyer was on Wolf Blitzer. And Wolf Blitzer asked him a very simple question. The chief rabbi in the Ukraine says everything is wonderful there. The chief rabbi in Moscow is sitting behind Putin, and he's clapping away. What's going on? So, and I believe in this case they're both Chabad rabbis. So how could that be? The answer, I think, in the Ukraine is as follows. The Svoboda Freedom Party, which is part now of the ruling government, made it twice in the last 3 years to our top 10 anti-Semites in Europe. So have they changed any? I don't think so. Are they currently behaving a little bit? Yes. Does that mean there's a future for 300,000 Jews in the Ukraine? Nobody in the Ukraine has asked me, but I wouldn't hold my breath. So quite apart from the whole new complication with Crimea and Putin and the Ukrainian, the situation in Ukraine is always complex. And it's also complex for world Jewry. Do you spend millions of dollars to secure all the Jewish institutions in the Ukraine? Or do you spend a part of that and try to get the kids out to Israel? These are very tough decisions. Now about Putin, I would say the following. Through no intervention of ours, it's pretty clear that Vladimir Putin is not an anti-Semite. It happens. Okay? When he was in Israel, he went to visit his grade school teacher. Now, in watching, some people have said that he's playing chess while President Obama is playing checkers. So, having said that, we should, of course, all understand that if tomorrow it suited him, for whatever it is he needed to achieve, to unleash the anti-Semitic folks, I think he wouldn't lose a night's sleep over it either. But I think right now it's safe to say that you look at his record, and he is not an anti-Semite. Insofar as Russia and Israel, so I actually owe Vladimir Putin, my wife and I got a free dinner at the King David Grill, which I can't afford, because we were thrown out a day early from the hotel, because Vladimir Putin, right after President Obama made a comment about 1967 borders, showed up with 400 people for a 2-day visit to Israel. So whatever Putin can do to poke America power in the eye, he's there. Shrewd, also because of the links of the Russian Orthodox Church to the Russian compound and other places in Jerusalem. They definitely want to be players. Now, does Bibi Netanyahu see long range, this guy taking the place of Barack Obama and the Sixth Fleet? Of course not. But, the times, unfortunately, are changing. And of course, for Israel, surrounded by failed states, thank God for settlements. Otherwise, what would anybody in Europe or in the State Department talk about? While the world burns, literally burning beneath our feet, that's all they can talk about. And the pressures we'll probably hear from General Amidror, but the asymmetrical war against Israel, which includes the boycotts and all the rest, they constitute a serious threat. In the meantime, Israel needs to be strong and get stronger. And for those of you who visited recently, I hope you agree with me, the country is young again. It's cooking in such a wonderful way, despite all the efforts of the politicians and the chief rabbis to screw things up. It is such an amazing place because we're witnessing what the prophets promised us, the X factor of what happens when the land of Israel and her people are reunited. Amazing, amazing things have happened. And on that point, let me just say one thing. This past Wednesday, I was part of the Wiesenthal Center delegation. We met with President Hollande at the Elysee. He confirmed that there are 1,000 French citizens who are or were in Syria. 31 have died. Some came back traumatized from what they experienced and are not factors. The rest are and have melted into the population, many of them armed. That was at 3 o'clock. At 6 p.m., we went over to UNESCO World Headquarters, and we opened there, co-sponsored by UNESCO, our new exhibit, the 3,500-year relationship of the Jewish people to the Holy Land. That exhibition, which we pay for, and I don't know if you've ever had Professor Robert Wistridge from Hebrew U here. What a genius, what a mensch. He wrote it for us. Was canceled 6 months ago because 22 Arab nations didn't like our exhibition. Oh, did they read the exhibition? They didn't have to. What kind of chutzpah? Imagine Jews want to share the narrative that they've been in Eretz Yisrael for 3,500 years. So they tried to cancel it, and I can report to you that on Thursday we had about 400 people, diplomats from 4 countries, and we hope sometime in the near future we'll bring the exhibition right here to South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, wonderful to meet you.